The desert sun presses against my skin, heavy and relentless. All around me, the land is bare and rugged, stretching endlessly until the horizon shimmers in waves of heat. Yet, at the heart of this harsh wilderness, there is life. Mecca, my home, a city unlike any other in Arabia. I walk its narrow streets, lined with mud brick houses, shaded by the walls of tall merchant dwellings. The air is thick with dust and the mingled smells of spice, leather, and sweat. Traders shout from their stalls, their goods laid out before them. Silks from the east, frankincense from Yemen, grain from Syria, and perfumes that linger in the air like hidden whispers. Caravans arrive daily, their camels groaning beneath loads of cloth, dates, and treasures. I hear accents from every corner of Arabia, even the distant lands beyond. Mecca is alive, not just with trade, but with power. Its wealth and influence flow from something far greater than commerce. At the center of it all stands the Kaaba, the ancient sanctuary. Black draped, towering in the courtyard, it draws pilgrims from every tribe. They circle it, bow to it, offer sacrifices before it. But inside, I know, stand idols, hundreds of them, each claimed by a tribe, each representing their gods. Stone and wood figures gilded with offerings crowd the sacred space where once, I am told, the house was dedicated to the worship of one god. Yet that knowledge is faint, lost beneath centuries of custom. Here in Mecca, every tribe clings to its idol. The Quraysh, proud rulers of the city, guard these practices fiercely. Their status and wealth depend on it. Life here is not gentle. Tribal honor defines everything. Your bloodline, your alliances, your strength. A man without a tribe is nothing, vulnerable to scorn and exploitation. Blood feuds stretch across generations, sparked by the smallest insult. The strong rule the weak, and slavery is common. Men and women bought and sold like cloth in the markets. I see the gap between the rich and poor widen with each passing season. The wealthy sit in shaded courtyards, sipping cool water, their voices heavy with authority. Meanwhile, beggars line the streets, their children clutching at scraps, their eyes hollow. Mercy is rare in a society built on pride, wealth, and dominance. This is my world, a city proud of its traditions, yet blind to its divisions. A society where loyalty to tribe is everything, and where the poor and enslaved suffer in silence. And yet, as I walk past the Kaaba, watching pilgrims bow to lifeless idols, I feel an unease in the air, as if change is near. Something stirs beneath the surface of this city. Whispers of prophecy are not yet spoken, but I sense it. The stillness before a storm, the silence before a revelation that will reshape not just Mecca, but the entire world. I remember the first time I saw him. He wasn't dressed in the fine robes of the merchants, nor carrying himself with the arrogance of the chiefs. No, Muhammad ibn Abdullah moved through the streets of Mecca with quiet dignity, as though he carried something greater than wealth or power. In a city where reputation is everything, he was known as Al-Amin, the trustworthy. And I saw why. When men argued in the markets over weights and measures, they would call upon Muhammad to settle their disputes. His word was enough. There was no suspicion, no murmur of dishonesty. Even the most hardened merchant accepted his judgment because everyone knew Muhammad did not lie. He had grown up among us, yet there was something about him that set him apart. Orphaned as a child, raised first by his grandfather, then by his uncle Abu Talib, his life was not one of privilege. He had known loss, hardship, and the fragility of life from an early age. Perhaps it was this that gave him his gentleness, this ability to understand suffering without scorn, to meet hardship with patience. I recall the time of the rebuilding of the Kaaba. The tribes of Quraysh, proud and jealous of their honor, argued fiercely about who should have the right to place the black stone back in its position. Bloodshed seemed inevitable. Then Muhammad, still a young man, stepped forward. He did not demand authority for himself, nor did he take sides. Instead, he asked for a cloth. Placing the black stone upon it, he invited the chiefs of each tribe to lift it together, each sharing the honor. Then, with his own hands, he placed the stone in its place, a solution so simple yet so wise that it turned anger into admiration. That day, I understood. This was not an ordinary man. In business, too, his honesty was unmatched. I traveled once with his caravan north to Syria. While other traders cheated with false measures or made promises they never intended to keep, Muhammad dealt fairly. His goods were of good quality, his tongue never deceived, his oaths never false. And because of this, people sought him out. It was no surprise when Khadijah, a noblewoman of great wealth, entrusted him with her trade. Their partnership was not only prosperous, it was built on trust. And soon, it became something more. When word spread of their marriage, many nodded with approval. She was older, wealthy, and respected. He was young, honest, and known for his character. But I remember how he spoke of her, not as a man proud of marrying into fortune, but as one deeply grateful for the kindness and love she gave. In her home, I saw him not as a merchant or mediator, but as a husband, gentle and devoted. Even before revelation, there was something in him, a restlessness with the world as it was. While others rejoiced in wealth, mocked the poor, or bowed to stone idols, Muhammad would withdraw. Often he sought solitude in the cave of Hira, high above the city, where silence wrapped around him like a cloak. Some said he was searching for something. I wondered if he already knew, deep in his heart, that the idols in the Kaaba could never hold the truth. At that time, we could not know what awaited. We saw only a man, trustworthy, honest, compassionate, thoughtful. But now, looking back, I realize we were witnessing the preparation of a prophet, the shaping of a man who would soon carry the weight of a message destined to change the course of history. The night was still, the kind of stillness that makes the desert feel endless. I climbed the rocky path of Mount Hira, my lantern flickering against the blackness, the city of Mecca lying silent far below. I often wondered what drew Muhammad to this cave. Perhaps it was the noise of the markets, the cries of the poor ignored by the wealthy, or the endless chants to lifeless idols that weighed on him. Whatever it was, he came here often, seeking solitude, reflection, and truth. That night was different. I stood at the mouth of the cave, the cold stone beneath my fingers, as he sat deep inside, wrapped in contemplation. His face was calm, his eyes fixed on nothing but the unseen. The air was unusually heavy, as though the very silence of the mountain was waiting for something. Then it happened. A presence, vast, overwhelming, like nothing I had ever felt, filled the cave. It was as though the mountain itself trembled under its weight. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. A figure appeared before him, neither man nor shadow, but something greater, radiant and commanding. Angel Jibril. Nah, his voice, thunderous yet clear, filled every corner of the cave. Iqra. Read, Muhammad gasped, his face pale, his voice trembling. I am not one who reads. His words were soft, almost pleading. But again the command came, stronger, undeniable. Iqra. Read. I felt the air crackle, as though the heavens themselves leaned down. Muhammad shook, struggling to comprehend. Again he replied, I am not one who reads. The figure drew him close, pressing the command into his very being, not with ink nor with parchment, but with truth itself. Then came the words that would change the world forever. Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not. The cave quaked with their power. I could feel them echo not just in my ears, but in my very soul. Mohammed's face was stricken, his body trembling under the weight of this revelation. His lips formed the words, repeating them as though etched into his heart. Then the presence withdrew, the silence rushed back, but it was not the silence of before. It was heavier, alive, filled with meaning. The stars above the mountain seemed brighter, as if they too bore witness. Muhammad stumbled from the cave, his steps unsteady, his heart racing. I followed him down the rocky path, the chill wind biting at us. His face was pale, his eyes wide with awe and fear. Over and over he whispered, "Cover me, cover me." When he reached home, Khadijah rushed to him. She wrapped him in blankets, holding him as he trembled, his voice breaking as he told her what had happened. Her eyes did not waver. She spoke with calm conviction, her voice steady as stone. "By Allah, he will never disgrace you. You uphold the ties of kinship. You bear the burdens of the weak. You honor the guest. You help those in need. This cannot be evil. It is the truth." In that moment, her faith steadied him. Together they went to Waraka ibn Nawfal, a man of knowledge, who confirmed what had happened. "This is the Namus, the angel sent to Moses. You have been chosen." The weight of it all settled upon him. A man who had lived 40 years as the most trustworthy among us was now entrusted with something far greater, the words of God himself. And I, who had stood in that cave, knew nothing would ever be the same. The desert winds would carry this message beyond the mountains, beyond Arabia, beyond all that we knew. The world had changed, though most of Mecca still slept, unaware that history itself had just begun a new chapter. The days after the first revelation felt like walking in a new world. The sun rose the same, the markets bustled, the Kaaba still stood surrounded by idols. But for Muhammad, and for those of us who knew, nothing was the same. He carried something greater now, words that burned with truth. At first, it was not shouted in the streets or proclaimed in the markets. No, the call began in whispers, in the quiet safety of trusted hearts. Khadijah, his beloved wife, was the first. Her faith was unshakable. Where others might have doubted, she believed with certainty, standing beside him as a pillar of strength. Then came a boy, young Ali ibn Abi Talib, raised in Muhammad's own home. I still remember the wide-eyed wonder in Ali's gaze as he listened. Though just a child, his heart was unclouded, free of the arrogance and stubbornness of older men. Without hesitation, he believed. Abu Bakr was next, a man respected in Mecca, known for his generosity and wisdom. He did not demand proof, nor argue with suspicion. Instead, when he heard Muhammad speak, he simply said, "I believe." And through his influence, others followed, men who would later carry Islam far beyond the deserts of Arabia. Then Zayd ibn Haritha, freed slave and beloved companion, whose loyalty to Muhammad was already unbreakable. For him, this message was not just belief, it was freedom, dignity, truth. These were the first circle, a handful of souls in a city of thousands. I would sit with them in secret gatherings, hearts trembling with both fear and hope. We prayed quietly, our foreheads pressed to the earth, Words of Quran still fresh and new, their rhythm unlike any poetry Arabia had ever known. They pierced the heart, stirring something no idol could ever awaken. But even in secrecy, the message carried weight. Each verse revealed cut into the fabric of Meccan life. Worship only one God. Abandon idols of stone. Protect the weak, feed the hungry, show mercy. These were not just words. They were a challenge to the very order of our society. I remember one night vividly. The house was dimly lit, the air thick with anticipation. Muhammad recited verses that spoke of resurrection, of accountability before the Creator. The room fell into a silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. For a moment, it was as if the walls themselves leaned closer to listen. We were few, but I could feel the power in that small room. Faith was spreading, not by the sword, not by wealth, but by truth. Outside, the city remained unaware. Quraysh chiefs continued their feasts. Poets sang praises to their idols, and merchants counted their profits. But beneath the surface, in courtyards and quiet corners, something new was taking shape. It was like the first flicker of dawn, fragile, hidden, but unstoppable. A light that would soon break over all of Mecca, and eventually, the world. At first, Quraysh hardly noticed. A few men, a few women, gathering quietly in corners of the city. Mecca had seen stranger things. But when the whispers grew louder, when the message began to challenge the very foundation of their wealth and pride, they could no longer ignore it. It began with laughter. I was in the marketplace when one of the Quraysh nobles, leaning against a pillar, mocked the prophet. "Have you heard?" he sneered. "Muhammad says our fathers are in error, that these idols of stone and wood are nothing." The crowd around him erupted with jeers. Some laughed nervously, others spat on the ground. But the mockery spread quickly, like fire catching in dry grass. Yet Muhammad did not respond with anger. He simply walked past, his face calm, his eyes unwavering. That silence unsettled them more than any argument could. The chiefs of Quraysh met in secret councils. Their voices carried through the night, sharp with fear and pride. "If this message spreads," one said, "our trade will collapse. Who will come to Mecca if the gods are insulted? What power will Quraysh have if Muhammad teaches there is only one God?" They tried persuasion first. Abu Talib, his uncle, was approached. I remember the tension on his face as they spoke. "Stop your nephew. Tell him to abandon this madness. If he wants wealth, we will make him the richest among us. If he wants power, we will crown him our leader. If it is poetry he seeks, we will give him the best poets." But when Muhammad was told of this, his reply struck deep. "By Allah, if they placed the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, I would not abandon this call until Allah makes it prevail, or I perish." Those words spread through Mecca. They knew then he could not be bought, nor silenced. So they turned to insults. In the streets, I heard them call him a sorcerer, a poet, a madman. Children were taught to jeer when he passed. Stones were thrown at his feet. Yet, even as the abuse rained down, he walked with patience, his voice steady when he spoke the words revealed to him. But ridicule soon hardened into something darker. Quraysh feared that his message would divide families, weaken tribes, and challenge their authority. And they were right. Already sons were believing while fathers cursed. Slaves were embracing Islam while masters fumed. Women whispered verses in secret while their households clung to idols. The city was restless, caught between truth and tradition. Every verse recited was like a spark thrown into dry brush. And I, standing in the midst of it all, felt the tension coil tighter each day. This was no longer whispers in hidden rooms. The message had stepped into the open, and Mecca was bracing for a storm. The first time I truly saw the cost of belief, it was under the scorching midday sun. A crowd had gathered in the open square, the kind of gathering that usually meant trade, song, or poetry. But this time, the air was heavy with cruelty. In the center lay a man, his back pressed against the burning sand, chains biting into his wrists. His name was Bilal ibn Rabah, a slave, but a man of faith, his lips whispering only, Ahad, Ahad, one. His master stood over him, sneering, pressing a stone so massive upon his chest that his ribs groaned under the weight. "Renounce it," he barked. "Say the names of our gods." But Bilal only repeated again and again, his voice breaking yet unyielding, "Ahad, Ahad." The people watched. Some laughed, some looked away in discomfort, but none could deny the power of his defiance. I felt my own throat tighten. It was not just a battle of body, but of soul. Elsewhere, I saw a different cruelty. The family of Yasir, an old man, frail but steadfast. His wife, Sumaya, her face lined with the years of labor, but her heart ablaze with belief. Their son, Ammar, trembling as Quraysh dragged them into the open, spears gleaming under the sun. "Curse Muhammad! Curse his Lord!" they demanded. But Yasir's voice, though weak, held firm, and Sumaya, her spirit unbreakable, spat defiance at them. The spear that struck her silenced her body, but her faith lived on. She became the first martyr in Islam, her blood soaking into the sand of Mecca. That day, the cruelty of Quraysh revealed itself fully. No one was spared. Slaves were tortured with iron heated in fire. Women were beaten, families torn apart, and all for uttering a single sentence, La ilaha illa Allah, there is no God but Allah. Yet what struck me most was not the pain, but the resolve. I saw Muslims walking with marks on their backs, welts on their arms, yet their eyes burned with an inner light. The Prophet, too, bore the brunt of ridicule. Once, while he prayed near the Kaaba, the nobles of Quraysh mocked him by placing the filth of a slaughtered camel on his back as he prostrated. They laughed until they gasped for breath, but he stayed in sujud, unmoving, until his young daughter Fatima rushed to wipe the filth away, her small hands trembling with anger. Each humiliation, each beating, each drop of blood only seemed to harden their conviction. And I realized something then. Quraysh thought they could crush this faith with force, but all they were doing was sharpening it like a blade against stone. The city of idols had become a furnace, and in that furnace, faith was being forged. The night was still when I saw them gathering at the edge of Mecca. Shadows moved quietly, avoiding the watchful eyes of Quraysh. Men, women, children carrying little more than what they could hold in their hands. They had no camels laden with goods, no guards for protection, just faith and a direction, west, toward the sea. I heard the whispers. Abyssinia, a land ruled by a Christian king, Al-Najashi, known for justice, a place where oppression could not reach. Among them was Uthman ibn Affan, noble in character, holding the hand of his wife, Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet. She leaned on him, her eyes heavy with both fear and hope. Behind them walked others, Jafar ibn Abi Talib, with a resolve that seemed to steady the hearts around him. Their steps were hurried, but their voices soft, reciting words of remembrance, as though clinging to Allah with each breath. When they reached the shore, I felt the salt air sting my face. The black waves rolled under the moonlight, and a ship swayed gently, waiting. For many, it was the first time they had seen the endless water vast, intimidating, like a test from Allah itself. Mothers clutched their children tighter as they boarded. Some wept, not from fear of the sea, but from leaving Mecca, the Kaaba, their homes, their kin. I could almost hear their hearts breaking. Yet above the grief was a quiet determination. If we cannot worship here, we will worship elsewhere. Allah is everywhere. The journey was not easy. The sea groaned, the ship creaked, and the waves threatened to swallow them. I watched as they prayed, their hands raised to the sky, asking for safety. And when they finally saw land green hills rising from the horizon, their cries of relief were almost louder than the waves. In Abyssinia, they found what they had been denied in Mecca: peace. They built homes, worked, and worshipped openly. For the first time, the call of La ilaha illallah was not met with stones or spears, but with curiosity and respect. But Quraysh did not rest. I remember the day 2 envoys dripping with arrogance arrived at Najashi's court. They carried gifts of leather, gold, and fine cloth bribes to poison his mind against the Muslims. They have abandoned the religion of their forefathers, the envoys declared. They've caused division in our city. Drive them out. The king listened, his eyes sharp. But he did not rush to judgment. Instead, he summoned the Muslims. I was there when Jafar stepped forward, his voice calm, yet unshakable. He spoke of the darkness of pre-Islamic life of worshipping idols, burying daughters alive, ignoring the weak. And then he spoke of the Prophet, of his message of truth, justice, and mercy. Finally, Jafar recited verses from Surah Maryam about the birth of Isa ibn Maryam, Jesus, son of Mary. The hall fell silent. I watched as tears welled in Najashi's eyes, rolling down his cheeks until his beard was wet. He turned to the Qurayshi envoys and said firmly, "These words and those that came before from Isa come from the same source of light. Go back to your people. I will never hand them over." That moment was like watching a storm pass. The Muslims, once trembling with uncertainty, stood tall with relief. In a foreign land, among strangers, they had found not just refuge, but respect. For me, it was the first glimpse of something bigger. Islam was not confined to Mecca. It had crossed the sea. And if it could reach Abyssinia, what could stop it from reaching the whole world? The night was unusually still. Mecca slept in silence, its narrow alleys lit only by the pale silver of the moon. I remember standing not far from the Kaaba, when I noticed the Prophet in quiet reflection, his face heavy with the grief of years, the loss of Khadijah, the loss of Abu Talib, the scorn of Quraysh. It was in that sorrowful night that something unimaginable began. I felt the air stir, like the very world was holding its breath. And then a light. Brilliant, pure, unlike fire or moonlight, yet softer than dawn. From it emerged a steed unlike any other. Its name was Burak White, radiant, larger than a mule but smaller than a horse. Its stride was said to reach as far as the eye could see. The Prophet mounted, and in a blink we were no longer in Mecca. The wind roared past, yet I felt no fear, only wonder as the world beneath blurred. Our first stop, Jerusalem, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. I saw the prophets of old gathered, ranks upon ranks, Ibrahim, Musa, Isa, and countless others. The Prophet stepped forward and led them all in prayer. In that moment, time itself seemed to fold, past and present standing shoulder to shoulder. But this was only the beginning. Then came the mirage, the ascension. From Jerusalem the heavens opened. I watched in awe as we rose, the stars parting like curtains, the vastness of creation unfolding before us. At each heaven doors opened, and we were welcomed. In the first, I saw Adam, father of mankind, greeting his son with warmth. In the second, Yahya and Isa, radiant and serene. In the third, Yusuf, his beauty more dazzling than the full moon. In the fourth, Idris, lofty and wise. In the fifth, Harun, with dignity shining in his eyes. In the sixth, Musa, who wept not from envy, but from the weight of knowing another would lead more souls to paradise than he had. And in the seventh, Ibrahim, reclining against Al-Bayt al-Mamur, the heavenly Kaaba, around which angels circled endlessly in worship without pause. Each greeting was not just welcome, but recognition, as though all of history had been preparing for this night. Then came the ascent beyond even the angels. The air grew still, the light beyond comprehension. Sidrat al-Muntaha, the lote tree of the utmost boundary. Its roots shimmered, its leaves vast, its beauty indescribable. No creation passed beyond this point. No angel, no prophet, only the messenger. I could not follow further. What happened next was veiled, but I knew this. He stood in the presence of Allah, closer than any soul had ever been. From that meeting came the command 50 prayers a day for the believers. On his descent, he met Musa once more, who urged him, "Your people will not bear it. Go back and ask for it to be eased." Again and again the prophet returned, until the prayers were reduced to 5. And Musa still said, "Even 5 may be too much." But the prophet, in mercy and trust, accepted. And Allah made it so that 5 prayers would carry the reward of 50. By dawn, he was back in Mecca. To some, it seemed impossible, even laughable. How could one travel to Jerusalem and to the heavens in a single night? Quraysh mocked, scoffed, jeered. But those with faith like Abu Bakr said simply, "If he said it, then it is true." And I, who had seen with my own eyes, could only tremble at the memory. That night was not a dream, not a tale. It was a journey beyond time, beyond space, beyond what the mind can grasp. It was a reminder. Islam was not just a message for Mecca, nor Arabia, but for all of creation. For years, the message had spread quietly, whispered from ear to ear, house to house. Meetings in dimly lit courtyards, hushed recitations of Quran under the cover of night. But now, the command had come. Proclaim openly what you are commanded, and turn away from the polytheists. Quran 15:94. The time of secrecy was over. I remember the morning when the prophet climbed the rise of Mount Safa. The sun was climbing over Mecca, casting long shadows across the valley. Merchants called from their stalls. Children chased one another through the alleys. Camels grumbled in the heat. But when the prophet raised his voice, everything seemed to stop. "O people of Quraysh," he called, his tone steady, his gaze sweeping over the clans gathered below. Curiosity drew them in. Men left their shops, women leaned from windows, elders shuffled closer until the crowd swelled. They respected his voice, for he was Al-Amin, the trustworthy, a man they had never known to lie. He asked them, "If I told you an army was gathering behind this hill, ready to descend upon you, would you believe me?" They answered at once, "Yes, we have never known you to lie." Then his words fell like a hammer. "Then know this, I am a warner to you. Before a severe punishment, there is no God but Allah. Abandon your idols and worship him alone." The air turned heavy. Some faces hardened, others faltered in confusion. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and then from the front his uncle Abu Lahab spat his fury. "May you be ruined for this! Is this why you gathered us?" He stormed away, his curse ringing in the air. Some laughed nervously, others followed in disdain, but not all left. A few stayed, their hearts stirred, eyes reflecting questions too deep to ignore. From that day on, the message was no longer confined to whispers. The prophet recited Quran aloud in the Kaaba's shadow. His companions began to speak, even when mockery followed. Islam was no longer a secret flame. It was a fire lit in the heart of Mecca. But with openness came backlash. Quraysh leaders fumed. How dare he insult their gods? How dare he challenge traditions older than memory? The markets buzzed with gossip. The shrines echoed with curses. Poets mocked him in verse. Yet every insult only spread his words further. I remember standing in a small circle one evening, listening as Umar ibn al-Khattab, then still an enemy, approached, sword in hand. Fury etched across his face. The companions tensed, certain blood would spill. But when the Quran was recited to him, his face changed, his anger broke. He wept, then declared his faith. That night, for the first time, Muslims prayed openly at the Kaaba, their voices rising in unison. The city had changed. Quraysh thought they could silence him with ridicule, but the truth had stepped into the light. And once light shines, darkness cannot hide. It began with whispers among Quraysh leaders. If we cannot stop them by mockery, if we cannot silence them with torture, then let us strangle them with hunger. A pact was written, sealed, and hung inside the Kaaba itself. No one was to marry into the family of the Prophet, no one to trade with them, no one to sit at their tables. Every tie of kinship, every thread of commerce severed. And so, the Muslims, along with the Prophet and his clan, were driven out of Mecca into a barren valley on its edge, Shib Abi Talib. I can still feel the air there dry, heavy, carrying the cries of children. Nights in the valley were sharp with cold, days scorching with heat. The palms that once swayed with fruit in Mecca were gone. Here there was nothing but dust and rocks. Food became scarcer than gold. Mothers would boil leaves to quiet their children's cries. I saw fathers wander the outskirts at night, hoping for a stray grain, a kind hand, or a morsel smuggled in by those who dared defy Quraysh's decree. Some companions chewed on leather straps, softened in water, just to fill their bellies. The cries of hungry children pierced the valley at night, and yet, despite the pain, their faith did not waver. I remember sitting near a fire one night, weak from hunger, when I heard verses being recited, voices thin but steady. Even in starvation, the Quran was their sustenance. But even among Quraysh, hearts stirred uneasily. Not all could stomach the cruelty. I overheard whispers among some merchants. "This is not our way. Are we to let women and children starve?" Slowly, cracks formed in the unity of Quraysh. And then came the day of deliverance. The pact, that cruel agreement, was brought down from the Kaaba, and to everyone's shock, it had been eaten away by insects. Every word was gone, except the name of Allah. Shame rippled through the Quraysh. The boycott crumbled. Families rushed to the valley, breaking bread with those who had suffered. Children laughed again, their cries replaced with joy. The Muslims, though thin and worn, emerged not weaker but stronger, bound by hardship, their faith unshakable. For me, it was proof. Quraysh had tried every weapon: ridicule, torture, starvation. But every trial only deepened the Muslims' resolve. What was meant to crush them had forged them into something unbreakable. And the Quraysh, they now knew. This was no fragile movement they could strangle in its cradle. This was something far greater. The journey to Aqaba felt long and strange. The desert stretched endlessly, a silent witness to the whispers of destiny. I walked behind Muhammad, among a small group of companions, feeling the weight of history in every step. The people of Yathrib, later called Medina, had heard of the Prophet, of the words he carried. They were troubled by the chaos in their city, tribal rivalries, blood feuds, and endless disputes. They sought peace, guidance, something beyond their daily struggles. One night, under a crescent moon, the leaders of Yathrib approached us. Their voices were cautious, respectful, yet determined. We have heard of your message. If what you bring is truth, then we wish to follow. We invite you to Medina to build a community based on justice and faith. Muhammad spoke with clarity, yet humility. He reminded them of the risks leaving their homes, challenging the Quraysh, standing against tradition. Still they listened, their eyes reflecting courage. Then came the pledge. Each man, one by one, raised his hand. Their words echoed into the quiet desert night. We pledge our lives, our honor, and our loyalty to your cause. We will protect you and your followers as we would our own families. I could feel the solemnity of the moment. It was not just a promise. It was a covenant of faith, courage, and hope. These were people willing to risk everything for truth, for justice, for Allah. The Prophet accepted their pledge, not with celebration, but with quiet resolve. He knew the journey ahead would be perilous, but this moment was a turning point. For the first time, he had allies beyond Mecca, hearts united not by tribe or wealth, but by belief. As we walked back to Mecca, the desert seemed less empty, the stars above brighter. I realized then that Islam was no longer confined to a city or a tribe. It was moving outward, gathering strength, ready to transform the lives of people beyond the mountains of Arabia. This was the first spark of a larger flame, a community built on loyalty, courage, and faith. And I was there, witnessing it all, knowing that the future of Islam was beginning to take shape. The night was thick with tension. Every alley of Mecca seemed alive with danger. The Quraysh had grown desperate. They had learned of the Prophet's plans to leave the city and plotted to stop him. I watched from a shadowed corner as he prepared. Muhammad spoke quietly to Abu Bakr, his closest friend, his voice calm yet weighted with the gravity of what lay ahead. They would leave in the dark, avoiding the watchful eyes of their enemies, taking only what was necessary, a few belongings, provisions for the journey, and unwavering faith. The streets were empty, save for the occasional patrol of Quraysh. Each step forward was measured, careful. Every sound made my heart race. We moved like shadows over the sand, slipping past walls, keeping to paths only we knew. The night air carried the scent of fear and hope together. Fear for what awaited if we were caught, hope for a new life free from oppression. Children slept in quiet homes, unaware that history was being written outside their doors. At one point, Quraysh came close. Horses clattered on the stones. Voices called out, but the Prophet remained steady. Abu Bakr and I covered him as they hid in a narrow cave nearby the cave of Thor. Inside, darkness enveloped us, and the sound of the desert night pressed against the entrance. The companions whispered prayers, hearts beating as if in unison with the sands outside. Time stretched. We could hear the Quraysh searching for hours, voices fading only with the distance. Every minute in that cave was heavy with both anxiety and trust that Allah would guide them, protect them, and carry them safely toward their destiny. Finally, the danger passed. They emerged from the cave at dawn, the first rays of sunlight cutting across the desert like a promise. Ahead lay the wide-open path to Medina. The Prophet mounted, Abu Bakr by his side, and I followed, feeling both exhilaration and solemnity. The journey was long. Days under the burning sun, nights shivering in the cold. Water was scarce, and hunger tested even the strongest. Yet every step forward felt lighter than the oppression they had left behind. Each verse recited, each prayer whispered was a shield and a nourishment for the soul. We crossed valleys and hills, encountering tribes along the way. Some were friendly, offering water and shelter, while others were indifferent. But none could stop the march of faith. Medina was drawing near, a city ready to embrace the message, ready to witness the birth of a community unlike any before. When the Prophet finally set foot in Medina, he was greeted not as a stranger, but as a leader, a guide, a beacon. The city had prepared itself through the pledges at Aqaba. And for the first time, Islam had a home beyond Mecca, a place to grow, to thrive, and to shine. I stood among the crowd, heart pounding with awe, realizing that what we had witnessed, the courage, the danger, the trust, was the beginning of a new chapter. The Hijra was more than a migration. It was a statement to the world that faith cannot be silenced, and that truth always finds a path. Medina was a city of tribes, each with its own leaders, its own grudges, and its own codes of honor. When the Prophet arrived, I felt the tension in the air. Years of disputes and blood feuds lay like scars across the city. But there was also hope. People longed for a system that would unite them, for justice that would be fair to all. The Prophet moved quickly, meeting with tribal elders, Jewish leaders, and newcomers from Mecca. I watched as he listened to each side, eyes calm, face radiant with patience. His words were measured, his tone gentle but firm. And then came the first major step, the Constitution of Medina. It was more than a document. It was a vision. I was there when it was read aloud in the city square. Its clauses echoed like music, yet carried the weight of law. Unity of the Ummah. All Muslims, regardless of tribe, were bound together in loyalty and protection. Rights and duties. Every individual, Muslim or non-Muslim, had rights to protection, security, and justice. Conflict resolution. Disputes would be settled by councils, not bloodshed. Defense and cooperation. If Medina was attacked, every group would stand together, regardless of differences. I could see disbelief in some faces, suspicion in others. Could this really work? Could centuries of rivalry and resentment be set aside for the sake of faith and fairness? But the Prophet demonstrated it in practice. He visited homes, mediated arguments, settled property disputes, and ensured that the poor and vulnerable were cared for. I watched as widows were provided for, orphans given protection, and even former enemies treated with dignity. The mosque became the heart of the city. It was not just a place of worship, but a center of education, consultation, and social support. I saw people gathering there to pray, to learn, to discuss matters of governance, all under the guidance of Muhammad. What struck me most was the sense of justice. Tribes who had fought for generations could now sit together in peace. Disputes that would have ended in bloodshed were resolved with words, fairness, and compromise. The city felt alive in a new way, a rhythm of life shaped by faith, law, and unity. Even beyond the rules, the prophet instilled a moral code. Honesty, kindness, humility, and compassion were expected not just in public, but in private life. I observed people change, slowly, as if the city itself was being purified by the very presence of Islam. And through it all, I realized something profound. This was more than survival. This was the creation of a society that embodied the principles of justice, mercy, and faith, a model for generations to come. Islam had left Mecca behind, but in Medina, it had found a home, a community, and a foundation strong enough to withstand the storms ahead. The desert was quiet in the early dawn, but I knew it would not stay so for long. Rumors had reached Medina. Quraysh were gathering forces to challenge the Muslims. The city held its breath. I could feel the anxiety in the air, yet mingled with it a sense of purpose. This was not just about survival. This was about defending faith, community, and justice. The first major clash came at Badr. I remember standing on the edge of the desert plain, watching as the small Muslim army, numbering only a few thousand, faced the Quraysh's larger, well-equipped force. My heart pounded. Could this handful of believers withstand such might? Muhammad walked among us, calm and resolute. His words were not just instruction, but encouragement. Do not grieve. Allah is with us. Stand firm, for truth will prevail. The battle was unlike anything I had witnessed. The sound of hooves, the clash of swords, the cries of men and animals, it all blended into chaos. Yet amidst it, I saw courage that defied numbers. Men who had been slaves, traders, and shepherds fought like lions, inspired by faith rather than fear. Miraculous turns seemed to appear. The Muslim archers held strategic points. The Quraysh were confused, and small victories rippled across the battlefield. When it ended, the Muslim army, though exhausted, had prevailed against overwhelming odds. I remember looking around and seeing joy and relief in the same breath as grief for the fallen. But victory did not make them complacent. The Battle of Uhud brought a harsh lesson. Some companions, ignoring orders, left their positions to gather spoils. The Quraysh seized the moment, and chaos erupted. I witnessed the Prophet struck, bloodied, yet refusing to abandon his post. He encouraged the remaining fighters, showing that courage and discipline were as vital as faith. Then came the Battle of the Trench, a siege that tested patience and ingenuity. Quraysh, joined by allied tribes, surrounded Medina, intending to crush the Muslims. But it was the Prophet's wisdom that turned the tide. He ordered a trench to be dug around the city, an unfamiliar tactic in Arabia. I watched as men labored day and night, sweat mixing with dust, hearts racing with fear and hope. When the Quraysh arrived and found the trench impassable, frustration turned to retreat. Medina was saved. These battles were not just about swords and strategy. I saw the unity of the community, the moral courage, and the reliance on faith. Every prayer before a fight, every word of guidance, every act of bravery, it was clear that belief infused them with strength beyond human measure. And I realized the message of Islam was not passive. It demanded action, courage, and defense when justice was threatened. It was a faith that shaped hearts, guided minds, and, when necessary, forged warriors of righteousness. After the battles, the Prophet knew that true strength was not just in swords, but in words, agreements, and hearts won through respect and fairness. I watched as he sat with elders, tribal leaders, and envoys from Mecca under the shade of a palm tree, the desert sun warming our backs. The most pivotal moment came at Hudaybiyah. Quraysh had blocked the Muslims from performing the pilgrimage to Mecca, and tensions were high. I remember standing among the companions, nervous and restless, wondering if diplomacy could possibly succeed where force had failed. The Prophet spoke with calm authority. "We seek peace, not conflict. Allah guides the wise, and those who rely on him are never truly weak." Negotiations began. Each clause was debated carefully. Who would go where? Who would be considered a Muslim ally? What were the rites of passage? Quraysh leaders scoffed at some terms, thinking them unfavorable. Some companions whispered, frustrated, believing we were surrendering. But the Prophet saw beyond the surface. This treaty was more than paper. It was a step toward opening hearts, reducing hostility, and allowing Islam to reach more people peacefully. When the treaty was signed, there was a quiet sense of tension and hope. I witnessed the Prophet explain to the companions, "Sometimes what appears as a loss is a gain in disguise. Be patient. The world will see the truth of this faith in time." And he was right. Within months, tribes from all over Arabia came to Medina, inspired by the fairness, patience, and clarity of the Muslim community. Alliances were formed not through force, but trust. People who had never spoken to Muslims before now pledged support, attended the mosque, and embraced the message. Diplomacy extended beyond Arabia. I saw letters carried by trusted messengers to kings and leaders, inviting them to Islam. The tone was never one of aggression, but of invitation, explanation, and moral persuasion. Each letter outlined justice, truth, and the oneness of Allah. I observed the subtle power of these words. They traveled farther than any army, reaching hearts that swords could not. Through diplomacy, the Prophet showed that Islam was not a fleeting force of battle alone. It was a faith that built bridges, healed wounds, and spread through wisdom and fairness. I realized then that the expansion of Islam was as much about patience, dialogue, and integrity as it was about courage and victory. I remember the day the Prophet called for his companions to deliver letters to kings and rulers far beyond the Arabian Peninsula. The air in Medina was alive with a mixture of excitement and gravity. These letters were not ordinary. They carried the message of Allah, the call to justice, and the invitation to embrace monotheism. Envoys were chosen carefully, men known for honesty, courage, and eloquence. I watched as they received letters, sealing each with the Prophet's signet ring. The letters were simple yet powerful, speaking directly to the hearts of rulers. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, from Muhammad, the messenger of Allah, to King's name, peace be upon you. I invite you to Islam. Accept the guidance of Allah. Follow the straight path, and you will prosper in this world and the next. First, the Byzantine emperor. I watched the envoy traverse mountains, deserts, and rivers, carrying the words of the Prophet. When he arrived, the emperor's court was lavish, filled with advisors and guards. The envoy recited the letter aloud, and I imagined the hush that fell as every word struck the audience. Some were skeptical, others curious. The beauty was in the message itself, a call to justice, peace, and the worship of one God. Next were the rulers of Persia, Egypt, and Yemen. Each letter met different reactions. Some mocked, some were intrigued, and some quietly pondered the words. What amazed me was how far-reaching this effort was. Islam was stepping beyond the deserts of Arabia, touching kingdoms and courts that had never heard such a message directly from a prophet. I watched the prophet prepare the companions for questions they would face. He advised wisdom, patience, and clarity. When envoys returned, they shared tales of curiosity, debate, and even acceptance. In some courts, envoys were honored. In others, dismissed. Yet every letter planted a seed, a spark, in the hearts of those who heard. It struck me then, this was not conquest by sword, but by pen, word, and reason. The prophet understood that the message of Allah could reach across oceans and empires, not by force alone, but through invitation and clarity. Standing in Medina, I could see a new world forming. Islam had grown roots in the hearts of tribes and individuals, and now, with these letters, it stretched its branches toward distant lands. The vision was immense, and I felt privileged to witness the beginning of a global outreach, one that would shape history in ways I could barely imagine. The air in Medina was thick with anticipation. Years of exile, persecution, and struggle had weighed heavily on the Muslims. Quraysh had plotted, attacked, and mocked. But now, the time to return to Mecca had come not with vengeance, but with wisdom and mercy. I remember standing on the outskirts of Medina as the army of Muslims, thousands strong, prepared to march. Each man, young and old, carried himself with discipline and calm. Muhammad walked at the forefront, his demeanor serene, yet resolute. There was no boast, no anger in his eyes, only purpose. The journey to Mecca was quiet. No drums of war, no chants of triumph. We moved silently, almost like shadows, to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. The Quraysh were unaware, unprepared, their arrogance still blinding them. As we approached the city gates, the prophet instructed, "Do not harm a soul, do not destroy, do not steal. Mercy is our banner today." I could scarcely believe it. After years of torture and mockery, after battles and exile, the prophet commanded compassion. Even those who had been our enemies would be spared. When the Muslims entered Mecca, people were shocked. Families peeked from windows, some in disbelief, others trembling with fear. But Muhammad rode calmly into the city, removing idols from the Kaaba with his own hands, restoring it as a place of pure worship. The air was filled with awe. Children cried, elders wept, and some Quraysh fell to their knees in surrender. Yet the prophet did not gloat. He forgave those who had plotted against him, pardoned his enemies, and declared that no one should be harmed. I remember hearing him say, "Go, for you are free. No blame shall be upon you today." It was unprecedented. A conqueror could have demanded blood, revenge, or humiliation. But this was mercy in its purest form. Even the family of Abu Lahab, once a relentless enemy, was treated with dignity. The Kaaba was cleansed, prayers were offered, and a city once divided by fear and idol worship now trembled in reverence for Allah. Everywhere I looked, I saw tears, tears of relief, gratitude, and recognition of a higher truth. That day, I realized that Islam's strength was not just in battles won, but in the moral courage to forgive, to restore, and to unite. The conquest of Mecca was not merely a political victory. It was a triumph of mercy, faith, and righteousness. For me, witnessing this moment was transformative. I saw what true leadership meant. To wield power not for vengeance, but for justice and compassion. And in the hearts of the people, I felt a shift, a recognition that truth and mercy could conquer even the deepest hatred. After the conquest of Mecca, a profound sense of calm settled over the Arabian Peninsula. The battles were over, and now the task was different. guiding a vast, newly united community, ensuring that faith was practiced with sincerity and embedding justice and morality into everyday life. I walked alongside Muhammad through the streets of Mecca and Medina, observing the city as it transformed. Markets thrived, but fairness was expected in trade. Families returned to their homes, reconciled with former rivals, and new mosques were built to accommodate growing congregations. The Prophet spent his days teaching, reminding people of Allah's commands, and answering questions from companions and visitors alike. I watched as he emphasized the core principles: honesty, compassion, humility, and justice. No one, whether rich or poor, was exempt from these standards. One of the most profound moments was the farewell pilgrimage. I stood among thousands in the open plains of Arafat, the sun beating down, yet the atmosphere electric with faith. The Prophet addressed the crowd. All mankind is equal. No Arab has superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab have superiority over an Arab, except by piety and good action. Every word seemed to resonate deep within the hearts of those present. I saw men and women weeping not from sorrow, but from the weight and clarity of truth. This pilgrimage was more than a ritual. It was a final lesson in humility, equality, and devotion. During these years, the Prophet also focused on teaching proper worship, social ethics, and community governance. Disputes were resolved fairly, rights of women and the vulnerable were protected, and guidance for economic dealings was clarified. I observed that his leadership was not about authority alone. It was about setting an example, leading by action as much as by words. Even in casual conversations, he imparted wisdom. I remember him speaking to young and old alike, always patient, always attentive. Lessons were given gently, yet they carried the weight of eternity. People left inspired, determined to act justly, to spread goodness, and to uphold the teachings of Islam. These final years were a consolidation of all that had been achieved. The faith was rooted, the community strengthened, and a moral, spiritual, and legal framework was firmly established. For me, it was clear that the Prophet had not only led armies or gained followers, he had built a society grounded in justice, compassion, and unwavering faith in Allah. And as I walked beside him during these last years, I realized that every trial, every revelation, and every triumph had been steps toward creating a legacy that would endure far beyond our lifetimes. The air in Medina felt heavier that morning. There was an unusual quiet in the city. I could sense a shift, a tension that words could not describe. Muhammad, our guide, mentor, and friend, was unwell. His strength had waned, yet his presence still carried the same calm authority and warmth. I stayed close, observing as companions tended to him, bringing water, cooling cloths, and offering gentle words. His face, serene and radiant even in illness, spoke of peace. I remember him teaching until the very end, whispering reminders of Allah, urging patience, kindness, and steadfastness. As the hours passed, it became clear that his time in this world was nearing its end. The companions gathered around, grief mingled with reverence. Tears fell silently, hearts were heavy, yet every eye was fixed on him, searching for guidance one last time. He spoke softly, words laden with wisdom. Pray, observe justice, and hold firmly to the Quran and my Sunnah. These will guide you when I am gone. I watched as Abu Bakr, Umar, Ali, and others absorbed each instruction, their expressions a mix of sorrow and determination. The companions were shaken, yet they understood the weight of responsibility that now rested on their shoulders. Finally, the moment came. Muhammad passed away in the quiet of his home, surrounded by love, reverence, and the light of faith he had kindled in countless hearts. Silence followed, the kind that holds both grief and gratitude. I felt the sorrow deeply, as if a part of the world had shifted. Yet there was also a sense of continuity, a recognition that his message was eternal, that his work was now carried forward by those who had witnessed it firsthand. In the days that followed, I observed the companions organizing the community, preserving the teachings, and guiding the people with patience and wisdom. His legacy was alive in every act of justice, every prayer, and every word of counsel. I realized then that witnessing his passing was not an end, but a reminder of the resilience of faith. The message of Islam would continue, not bound to a single lifetime, but alive in the hearts and actions of those who believed. And I, having seen it all, the trials, the triumphs, and the unwavering devotion, understood the depth of what we had been a part of, the birth of a movement that would shape history forever. The passing of the Prophet left a void in the hearts of the Muslims, yet it also sparked a new determination. I watched as Abu Bakr was chosen as the first caliph, his humility and resolve setting the tone for leadership in this new era. The companions rallied around him, united by faith and loyalty, ready to protect and spread the message they had witnessed firsthand. From Medina, the call to Islam began to echo across the Arabian Peninsula. I followed the news as tribes and cities gradually embraced the faith, inspired by both the integrity of the companions and the clarity of the message. The Ridda Wars, which seemed at first like strife, ultimately solidified unity, bringing those who had turned away back under the banner of Islam. Umar ibn al-Khattab, a companion of remarkable courage and wisdom, succeeded Abu Bakr. Under his leadership, I saw the expansion accelerate. Armies moved with discipline, yet with the ethical principles taught by the Prophet. Non-combatants protected, treaties honored, and fairness in governance upheld. Persia, the Byzantine territories, and beyond became aware of a new power rooted in faith and justice. Trade routes and cities flourished under Islamic governance. I observed the companions establishing schools, courts, and systems of charity. The principles of equality, social justice, and moral integrity guided every decision. Islam was no longer a movement confined to one city or one people. It was spreading like a river, nourishing hearts and societies along its path. What struck me most was the resilience of the believers. Stories of courage, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion reached me constantly. Men and women who had witnessed the Prophet's teachings firsthand became the living vessels of his message, ensuring that faith was not just preserved, but actively shared. And so, from the sands of Mecca and Medina, the seeds planted by the Prophet began to flourish across lands, languages, and cultures. I watched as mosques rose in distant cities, scholars taught the Quran, and communities thrived under the guidance of the faith. It was a continuation, a living proof that the message of Islam was eternal, capable of guiding generations far beyond the time of its first revelation. As I reflected on all I had witnessed, the struggles in Mecca, the migration, the battles, the diplomacy, the mercy, and the unity, I realized that I had been part of a story larger than any one life. A story of faith, courage, and divine guidance that would ripple through history, shaping the world in ways unimaginable. And I felt both awe and gratitude knowing that I had seen the very beginning of a legacy that would endure forever.